That sound. You know exactly which one I'm talking about. You back out of your driveway in the morning, maybe it's a little cold outside, and the second you touch the brake pedal, that metallic, almost embarrassing squeal that makes your neighbor's dog look up. You pull into a parking lot, and everyone within 50 feet now knows you're there. You slow down at a red light, and the I-caught person in the car next to you glances over. It's not painful. It's not dangerous. Not always anyway. But it is relentless. And it is deeply, personally annoying. So what do most people do? They go to a mechanic. The mechanic looks at the brakes, maybe gives them a quick inspection, and then delivers the news. You're going to need new brake pads, or rotors, or both. And suddenly, a noise that started as an inconvenience has turned into a $200, $400, sometimes $600 conversation. And here's what gets me. In a lot of those cases, not all, but a significant portion, the brakes are fine. The pads have plenty of life left. The rotors are clean, but the squeak, still there. Because the squeak isn't always about worn parts. Sometimes it's about something much simpler. Something that costs about $2 to fix. And something that, interestingly, was better understood and more widely practiced several decades ago than it is today. That's what this video is about. Here's what makes brake squeak so maddening. It's not always a safety issue, but every single time it happens, your brain says danger. That's by design, actually. Brake pads are engineered with what's called a wear indicator, a small metal tab that contacts the rotor when the pad gets low enough to need replacing. That contact creates a squeak on purpose. It's your car telling you something, and that system works. That system is important. But that's one kind of squeak. The problem is that brakes can squeak for a whole range of reasons that have nothing to do with wear. Cold weather causes metal components to contract slightly, which changes the contact dynamics between the pad and rotor. Dust and fine debris can get into the caliper assembly. Glazing, where the pad surface gets slightly hardened from heat, creates vibration. And then there's the most overlooked cause of them all, the absence of lubrication at the specific points around the brake assembly where it belongs. Notice I said around the brake assembly, not on the braking surfaces themselves. That distinction matters enormously, and we're going to come back to it. What I want you to understand right now is that the auto repair industry is built around parts replacement. That's not a criticism. Replacement is often legitimate and necessary, but it does mean that the simpler, cheaper, preventative approaches sometimes don't make it into the conversation as often as they could. A $2 can of spray doesn't generate the same revenue conversation as a full brake job. That's just economics, not malice. But it does create a gap in what the average car owner knows. Now here's where things get interesting, because this isn't a new problem and it isn't a new solution. If you go back to the 1960s and 70s, the era when a lot of home mechanics were doing their own brake jobs as a matter of course, there was a much broader understanding of brake maintenance as a process, not just a replacement cycle. Guys working in their driveways with a shop manual and a floor jack knew that when you installed new pads, you prepped the hardware. You cleaned the contact points, and you applied lubricant, specifically a heat-resistant, non-petroleum-based lubricant, to the backing plates, the caliper slide pins, and the contact edges between the pad and the caliper bracket. That practice didn't disappear because it stopped working. It became less common as brake service became more commercialized, more rushed, and more focused on the billable components. The labor guide doesn't have a line item for applying brake lubricant. It's a 2-minute step that used to be considered just part of doing the job right. By the mid-1980s and into the 90s, as quick lube culture expanded and dealership service centers became the norm for most drivers, a lot of that foundational knowledge started to exist more in old shop manuals than in everyday practice. This isn't about blaming anyone. Mechanics today are often working under serious time pressure with high vehicle volume. But the result for the average car owner is that they inherit a knowledge gap. They learn about brake wear. They learn about rotors. They don't always learn about the 3 or 4 specific points on a brake assembly, where a small amount of the right lubricant makes a significant difference, and where the absence of it leads directly to that squeak that's been driving them crazy. The product we're talking about is a high-temperature, dry film lubricant, and the specific one most accessible to you costs about $2 at any auto parts store. The most common version you'll find is sold under names like Disc Brake Quiet, Brake Caliper Lube, or Ceramic Brake Lubricant Spray. The spray format is what we're focused on here, though the paste version works on the same principle. You want something specifically rated for brake systems, heat-resistant, non-petroleum, and designed to remain stable under the thermal cycling that brakes go through. $2, sometimes $3, at every major auto parts chain and plenty of general hardware stores. Now, I want to be clear about what this spray is not. It is not a magic fix for every brake noise situation. If your pads are worn down to the wear indicator, this won't help. You need new pads. If your rotors are deeply scored or warped, this won't address that. This is not a substitute for necessary repairs. What it is a targeted solution for the specific, extremely common type of brake squeak that comes from metal-on-metal vibration at the non-friction contact points of the brake assembly, which, based on the patterns of brake noise complaints, is the cause in a substantial portion of cases, particularly on cars with otherwise healthy brake components. To understand why this works so well, you need to understand what actually causes that squeak in the first place. A brake pad has two main surfaces. The friction material on the front, that's the side that contacts the rotor and stops your car. And the metal backing plate on the back, that's the side that sits against the caliper piston, or the caliper bracket hardware. When you press the brake pedal, hydraulic pressure pushes the caliper piston against that backing plate, which pushes the friction material against the spinning rotor. The friction slows the wheel. Simple enough. But here's what's happening physically. In that moment, the pad is under enormous pressure. It's being squeezed against a spinning rotor, and it's experiencing rapid, high-frequency vibration as the friction surface engages. Think of it like running your finger along the edge of a wine glass. That vibration is what produces sound. With brake pads, the specific frequency of that vibration determines whether you get a squeak, a groan, or silence. The backing plate of the pad makes contact with the caliper bracket at what are called the abutment clips, or contact points. These are the edges, the corners, the small tabs of metal where the pad slides and sits. In a properly lubricated system, those contact surfaces have just enough lubricant to allow controlled movement without generating the specific high-frequency vibration that produces that squeak. When that lubrication is absent, either because it was never applied or because it's dried out over time, metal contacts metal with nothing in between. The vibration frequencies change, and you get that sound. The dry film, heat-resistant lubricant acts as what engineers call a damping agent at those specific contact points. It doesn't stop the pad from moving. It needs to move. It doesn't interfere with braking performance. It never touches the friction surface. What it does is interrupt the vibration frequency that produces audible squeak. This is the same principle that has been understood in mechanical engineering for a very long time. It's not experimental. It's not fringe. It's applied vibration damping. And it works. Alright, let's get into exactly how you use this, because the method matters just as much as the product. Before we start, a safety note. Working on brakes involves your vehicle's stopping system. If you're not comfortable with basic automotive work, or if you have any doubt about the condition of your brakes, please have a professional inspect them before proceeding. This information is educational. Your safety comes first, full stop. With that said, for someone comfortable doing basic DIY maintenance, this process is straightforward. Step 1. Get the right access. For the spray lubricant approach, you have two levels of application. The first is the without removal method, which works reasonably well for minor squeak and is accessible to anyone with basic tools. The second is the full removal method, which is more thorough and gives you a longer lasting result. For the without removal method, with the car safely on a flat surface, engine off, parking brake engaged. You're working through the wheel spokes or after removing the wheel if you're comfortable with that. Step 2. Identify the target points. You are not spraying the brake rotor. You are not spraying the brake pad friction surface. If lubricant gets on either of those surfaces, you will significantly reduce your braking performance. And that is a serious safety issue. What you are targeting are the specific contact edges between the brake pad backing plate and the caliper bracket, the small metal-on-metal contact points at the top, bottom, and sides of where the pad sits in the bracket. You're also looking at the caliper slide pins. These are the cylindrical bolts that allow the caliper to move freely, and on the back surface of the backing plate itself, where the caliper piston makes contact. Step 3. Clean before you apply. If there's old, dried lubricant, rust dust, or debris at those contact points, take a wire brush or some brake cleaner, which is different from the lubricant spray, and clean the area first. Applying new lubricant over contamination just seals the problem in. A clean surface is what makes the difference between this lasting months and lasting years. Step 4. Apply sparingly. This is where people sometimes overdo it. You are not coating these surfaces. You are applying a thin film. A brief controlled spray at each contact point. Wipe away any excess. You want coverage, not saturation. For the caliper slide pins, if they're accessible, a light application along the pin shaft after cleaning is ideal. These pins are responsible for even pad wear and proper caliper movement. A dry slide pin is also a very common cause of uneven brake noise. Step 5. Reassemble and test. If you remove the wheel, reinstall it. And torque the lug nuts properly. Refer to your vehicle's specification, typically in the owner's manual, or a quick online search for your make and model. Take the car for a slow, controlled test drive. Apply the brakes gently at first, building up gradually. You may notice the squeak is immediately reduced or gone. In some cases, especially after a cold morning, it may. Take a short drive cycle for the lubricant to fully seat. Give it a day before making your final assessment. Now, before you run out and grab a can, there are a few mistakes that will completely cancel out everything I just told you. Mistake 1. Using the wrong product. Not all lubricants are created equal for this application. Standard WD-40 is not what you want. It's a moisture displacer, not a high-temp brake lubricant, and it won't hold up under brake heat cycles. Regular petroleum-based grease will deteriorate quickly and can create more problems than it solves. You specifically want a product labeled for brake or caliper applications. High temperature rated, preferably ceramic or synthetic based. The label matters. Mistake 2. Getting it on the friction surfaces. I'll say this once more, because it's that important. If the spray contacts the brake pad face or the rotor surface, your stopping distance increases. Clean it off immediately with brake cleaner if that happens, and reassess whether the pads need to be replaced. There is no version of this where lubricant on braking surfaces is acceptable. Mistake 3. Skipping the cleaning step. Applying lubricant over dirty, corroded contact points is like putting new paint over rust. It looks fine for a while, and then fails faster than if you'd done it right. The cleaning step is not optional. Mistake 4. Treating this as a permanent substitute for worn parts. If your pads are worn, if your rotors are damaged, this spray won't change that. Use this as a maintenance tool, not a repair workaround. Know the difference between a squeak caused by vibration at contact points and a squeak caused by metal-to-metal contact from worn pads. The wear indicator squeak is persistent, gets louder under light braking, and doesn't go away after the car warms up. Vibration squeak is often temperature dependent, inconsistent, and occurs in brakes that otherwise feel and perform normally. I already know what some of you are thinking. If this is so simple, why doesn't every mechanic just tell you about it? And honestly, some do. A lot of good technicians absolutely apply brake lubricant as standard practice. If you've ever had a brake job done at a quality shop and they gave you a small container of brake paste, or mentioned the caliper hardware prep, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Those mechanics are doing it right. The disconnect isn't that the knowledge doesn't exist in the professional world. It's that it doesn't always make it to the consumer in a useful way. A 15-second step in a professional brake job doesn't generate a conversation at the service counter. Nobody calls you to say, "Hey, we applied a film of ceramic lubricant to your contact points, and that's why you've had no brake noise for 3 years. The absence of a problem is invisible." What this video is really about is giving you the information to understand what a good brake service includes, and giving you the option to apply that same principle at a $2 price point, rather than only finding out about it when you're already in the service bay. There's also something worth acknowledging here. The people who tend to remember and apply this kind of maintenance knowledge are often people who grew up working on cars themselves, or who had someone in their life who passed it down. That kind of hands-on, generational mechanical knowledge is genuinely less common now than it was 50 years ago. Not because the knowledge is secret, just because fewer people are doing their own brake jobs, and the context in which this kind of tip gets shared naturally has become less common. Look, the reason I make these videos is pretty simple. There is a version of car ownership where you are constantly on the back foot, where every noise means a trip to the shop, every warning light means an unknown bill, and every maintenance issue feels like a wall between you and understanding what's actually happening with your own vehicle. And then there's another version, where you have enough baseline knowledge to know what something actually is, what it actually costs to address, and when you genuinely need a professional, versus when you've got it handled yourself with tools you already own and a $2 product from the same store where you buy windshield washer fluid. That second version isn't just about saving money, though that matters. It's about the confidence that comes from not being entirely dependent on other people's expertise for something you use every single day. Brake Squeak is one of those things that sends a lot of people into unnecessary repair conversations. Not because mechanics are trying to take advantage of you, but because the symptom sounds alarming and the knowledge gap is real. Now you have the context to know the difference. You know what the squeak is actually coming from. You know what product addresses it, what it costs, how to apply it correctly, and what the limits of that solution are. That's not secret knowledge. It's just knowledge that got less visible over time. And that's exactly the kind of thing worth putting back in circulation. If this gave you something useful, whether you go try it this weekend, or just file it away for the next time the squeak shows up, consider subscribing. I cover this kind of practical, grounded automotive knowledge regularly. The stuff that's more useful than it is complicated, and more accessible than the industry sometimes makes it seem. Hit the bell so you actually see it when new videos come out. And if you've got a noise, a symptom, or a maintenance question you've been trying to get a straight answer on, drop it in the comments. I read them. Sometimes the next video comes directly from what's sitting in that comment section. Drive well and enjoy the silence.